I am a journalist, and after several years working as a communications aide, having all kinds of trouble with teams and the press, I decided I had to study management. I really became very interested in the subject of management. I went to very good schools in Brazil and in the United States for short-term courses on different aspects of management. But after a while, I found out that organizations were not willing to use management. There was big discourse, but no actual use of management. And in fact, what was happening is that they were applying to people the bad part of management, the pressure, acceleration, quantophrenia, and all those sorts of problems. So I decided to study this. I thought that my ideas would be very difficult to discuss unless I had academia, unless I had the theories behind me helping me to discuss this. So I went to the University of Brasília and took part of the program they have over there, Programa de Pós-Graduação em Administração. And I decided to study managerialism and worker subjectivity in the Brazilian environmental third sector. I would like to break down the subject over here. When I speak of managerialist ideology, I'll say it again, I'm not against management. I'm totally pro-management, but I'm against managerialism. When I talk about managerialist ideology, I'm talking about a system of ideas which sustains a certain struggle for power, which is marked by distorted, anti-democratic, and debasing managerial practices. I'm talking about this sort of management that is distorted into something that is debasing. When I talk about workers, I'm talking about people who are bound by any kind of functional structure in an organization. When I talk about subjectivity, I'm talking about an intimate mental process which indicates autonomy, expresses intentionality, point of view, posture in life. It stems from reflection and the acceptance of otherness, of alterity. And it expresses itself also via indications of intentionality and critical posture. When I talk about the third sector, I'm speaking of non-profit organizations, but non-profit is not enough. I'm talking about the part of the public sector which is moved by private intentions. Okay, I'm talking about public sphere, but I'm talking about private interest. I'll talk a little bit about the context in which we have developed this research. Third sector in Brazil has gained visibility and institutionalization strongly in the 1990s. There have been changes in law that have been very relevant, but we have found identity issues. As I was saying before, we have had many problems with the names, and discussions around that theme have always been confusing and have been complicated because of politics. But in spite of that, we have over 500,000 organizations today. This is an estimate. The latest study, which is from 2005, it's very old, speaks of 338,000 organizations in Brazil. The important thing is that between the last two studies there has been a growth of 20%. And the organizations that grow the most are the environmental organizations. So we're going to hear a lot about environmental organizations because we have you plus 20 in a couple of months. And the press is going to come, I mean, it's going to be an avalanche, right? So environmentalist and human rights organizations are the more prominent organizations in the third sector. Those are the ones that gain most space in the press. These organizations balance between the rationalities of the businesses, the for-profit, and the non-profit organizations. It oscillates between public and private spheres and between practical and substantive rationalities. And in Brazil, especially, it relates historically to movements that have to do with democratization and struggles for specific rights in the country. NGOs have been very important in the process of bringing down dictatorship and bringing free elections in the country in the 1980s. And professionals that work in such organizations usually expect more than financial gratification. So there's a strong sense that values are as important as salaries, right? Mission tends to be more important than the processes that lead to ends themselves. So democracy and the way these organizations conduct their businesses is more important than the ends themselves and the products themselves. What I have found while trying to close into a research question, this is the phenomenon that I have found. So what happens to these organizations? As they grow in number, they begin to compete for funds. There's competition for resources, and a general perception that there is a reduction in the investment in the social sector. If you add to that the fact that they need to have accountability in order to remain credible fundraising organizations, you will find that there will be a search for more efficiency. While they cannot find internal means to bring more efficiency, they resort to practices that come from the second sector, from the corporate world. And they adopt, without any filtering, corporate culture. They start to restructure their subsystems, and they import, using isomorphism, models that are moved by managerialist ideology. What are the problems with that? As I was saying, non-profit organizations are moved by substantive rationality. And the second sector, the corporate world, is moved by a finalistic, practical rationality. They're concerned about ends, about financial gain. And there's conflict, of course. So the discursive practices that are brought into the organizations are usually anti-democratic. We have found that people are being kept from expressing their ideas and their feelings. There is acceleration and condensation of work. There's precarization of work relations. Conflict is denied. People are convinced via subjective hijacking, which is a very strong word that's come from the French school. But it's mobilization of the psyche. Not as in older days, when people were coerced by means of force. Nowadays they're coerced by means of transformation of their ideas and impressions about what the organization is. We'll talk more about that later. People are viewed as an asset. And as an asset they are considered as cost-benefit units. Right? What this generates is a conflict between rationalities that I was talking about, substantive and instrumental. While in this process of conflict, either subjective conflict or a conflict of rationalities, questions arise such as, will we value our mission or will we value control as we search for efficiency? Will we value performance or will we value contribution as far as mission is concerned? Should noble ends justify evil means? Would it be possible for you to be humane and efficient at the same time? Should I keep my values or should I keep my salary? Such are the questions that people have to deal with when they are in conflict here. So this generates different processes. Usually what happens is that people get sick. There's a psychiatrization of the problem. They become unproductive and inefficient. So as you look for efficiency, what you get is more inefficiency. Or people tend to develop defense strategies so that they can commit to the organization. And all of this leads to two situations which, in the end, foster the managerialist agenda. People usually ask to leave or they are fired. There's early retirement. I haven't found any cases in Brazil, but I have found a case in Belgium of suicide. You will find plenty in the corporate world, but not in the third sector. I haven't seen it, fortunately. Or you will find what we call the non-profit paradox, which is a situation in which, as people try to bring management into the organizations, they will find that management becomes ever more distant because of the fact that the rationalities are so different that they cannot bring these two together. You will have the financial sector of the organization looking towards one direction, and you will have the mission-oriented people looking into another direction. This is the problem that we have found. And in order to study this, we have developed one general objective and these four specific objectives. The general objective was to analyze the effect of the advance of the managerialist ideology and practices upon the subjectivity of workers who are placed in third sector organizations. So, the specific objectives were to identify traces of the managerialist ideology in the discourse of the interviewees, Second objective was to verify how the subject symbolizes and articulates conflicts of rationality in discursive terms. To analyze how the subject reacts to and eventually defends himself from or adheres to managerialist strategies. And finally, to analyze the effects of managerialism upon the professional identity of workers in the third sector. So how do they feel about it? Are we still part of the third sector? Or are we part of something else? We have developed a qualitative and descriptive study, case study. It was based on a transversal case study. We have used the tools that we have found in clinical sociology. We have chosen our subjects using as filters the theories that have backed the study. And we also use snowball indication. We decided to deal with what they call themselves conservationist organizations, the ones that deal with nature conservancy. We chose 2 cosmopolitan organizations and 2 peripheral. The cosmopolitan organizations are the big ones, with big names, with known logos. They have very important entrepreneurs and corporations behind them with the financial help and agendas, of course. They have huge teams from 50 to 100 people, whereas the peripheral organizations in the Amazon region, I've traveled to the Amazon region, are very small. They have 2 or 3 people. Many of them are partners in the organization. They don't even have a salary, so they're not as professional, but they face the same types of problems. So this is what we chose. And here's an overview of the case units, mostly masculine in their 40s. These are the people that we have interviewed. We have interviewed people who are currently active in these organizations, and we have interviewed people who have decided to leave because of value conflicts. So we did individual semi-structured interviews. Of course, we had to create space for the establishment of reports so we could make them feel at ease, so they would say difficult things. They would talk about their psyche, they would talk about their illnesses, they would talk about problems in their marriage and everything that would arise from the difficulties they have in the workspace. We tried to go beyond the official and the explicit discourse because we wanted to articulate the real organization and the prescripted organization. We needed to find space for improvisation because people tend not to follow the straight line of interview questionnaires. And we use documental analysis as a means for verifying the information, verifying the data, and articulating, as I said, prescription and reality. We use discourse analysis. The basic definitions that we use were brought from Norman Fairclough and Michel Foucault. So when we talk about discourse here, we're talking about use of language as a form of social practice and also as a tool for gaining power, for the attainment of power. We described and analyzed the findings under the light of theory, and we validated some categories that we created. The 4 categories that we have created were based on the objectives that we had in the beginning. And we developed this little scheme here so that we could find, using the objective, which could be words that would indicate certain systems of ideas or ideological structures, systems in the discourse. I will now very briefly give you an idea of what we have found. So we were talking that one of the categories had to do with finding traces of managerialism in the discourse. And we did find many indications. As a matter of fact, in almost all of the interviews, we had more than enough evidence that managerialism has entered the systems of representation with which these organizations and these people deal with. So when I talk about assimilation of managerialist discourse and the precarization of labor conditions, one of the interviewers said, unfortunately, when the project is over, the attachment is over. It's a management option here. And it's correct. Taxation kills the institutions. So this is an example of teleological thought. The person tends to find a means of justifying the unjustifiable. They need to find in reality, in things that are seen as a system of cause and effect, justifications for things in which they do not believe. So they have internalized the idea that this is the way things are supposed to be, and we have to accept it and live with it. Acceleration and job intensification. When we talk about people, they use ideas that express strong natural disasters. They say, oh my God, this is like a tornado. This is like a volcano, right? So one of them said, it's utter madness. Once you're hired, you're in a volcano. You immediately have to fend for yourself. We're hearing this from people who are leading the way in Brazil and in the world when it comes to nature conservation. This is the sort of idea that is common right now in these organizations. Self-management and primacy of financial interest. I had no boss controlling me, but the organizational circumstance had me, you either show production or you're marginalized. The bosses usually say, people were telling me, we hired you because you had a very good curriculum. I don't need to tell you what to do. You have to fend for yourself, right? But we'll measure what you do, and that will decide which way you go. Illness. I've had a bipolar fit, but was treated. I went to the psychiatrist. That's simple. It took a little while. There's a medicine that cures that. In one of these organizations, I've been told there are monthly piles of 20 to 30 leaves of absence due to health problems, due to especially mental problems. It's current in the organizations to allow people for a month's leave so they can get their act together and come back, right? But the pressure pan is not turned off. You take the pan away from the stove, but the pressure pan is still there. The lid is still there. Management is a meta-language. This is a very important thing. One of the first things that I was telling you about, which is the idea that people use the containers, discursive containers, but not what is within. They will talk about management, they will use the very nice words, they will develop the maps, the strategic maps, they will hang the maps. But management itself, strategy itself, is not a practice in daily life. And it is not brought in as a useful tool in order to help people build a better future for themselves and for the world. I didn't translate this because it would be impossible, very difficult, but the general idea is this person was telling me that she wakes up and goes to work, and as she gets there, the boss will come and give her a list of things that she has to do. But there's a foremost task, and she'll begin working on that task. By 10 a.m., the boss will come and say, forget this, start this other task over here. And she starts the second task. 2 in the afternoon, the boss will come and say, listen, forget about all this. 3, 4, maybe 5 or 6 tasks a day. In the end, the boss will say, what have you achieved today? And the person will say, I couldn't end anything. What are you doing here? What are we paying you for? That's what she was telling me. This is the type of situation in an organization that has a strategy, that spends money, hiring consultancies that are supposedly helping them deal with management. The second category had to do with finding and discussing conflicts of rationality. So first of all, we discussed substantive rationality versus practical rationality. I put this first phrase over here because I think it sums up the whole problem. The person came to me as she was discussing daily chores and daily problems. She said, I have a 20-year-old daughter and we live by ourselves here. We need an income. So that would explain her accepting anything. This second one is more of a mathematical model, almost quasi-mathematical model in which you can see, and I had it in 2 different colors, but the red doesn't show very well here, how it alternates between positive and negative aspects of discourse. And it says, politically, you're at the mercy of the partners, and if you manifest your position publicly, you jeopardize the partnership. So this is negative. Over there, the person is thinking in practical, negative, I wouldn't say negative, but the person is thinking in practical terms. But then he says, and the partnership means resources, implementing the organization's objectives. That is mission taken over. Mission. Values taken over. And once again, you will have the practical rationality. And suddenly you find yourself reducing the intensity of your criticism and denouncement. And so it goes. So over here we find the conflict that we were looking for as far as rationalities. And this is intra-psychic conflict, right? The person is asking herself, she was talking to me, but she was looking at nothing. It was a blank look, and she was asking herself, what will be of me? What should I do with my life? Should I go a way that will bring me revenue, or should I go to a way that will make me happy? And this is just for you to have an idea of the kind of conflict that people go through. We found 5 different types of defense strategies. I'll go very quickly through these because we do not have time. First one was denial. People deny something that they see and that they understand. Right? The problem is right over there, and they try not to see it. Restructuring, as in changing chairs, going to another room, hasn't happened yet. They are having meetings with the consultants. Who do I mean by they? The coordinators and the superintendent. But restructuring hasn't begun yet. Naturalization. Unfortunately, when the project is over, the attachment is over. It's a management option here, and it's correct. Taxation kills the institution. Once more, the same. People try to turn what is unacceptable into something that is natural in their discursive systems. Safety networks. People get together and create safety networks so they can go through hard times. Organizational deification. The organization is a new kind of religion for many people. They will believe, they tend to think that the organization is salvation and will bring solutions to all of their personal problems, including the ones that are mostly erotic in broad terms, in Freudian terms. Last but not least, it was in Portuguese here, which is giving up. Many people simply give up. Their way of facing the situation is they give up. They go elsewhere whenever they can. I don't know where I'll go, I just know that I'll keep working. Starve I won't, but there are no conditions for me to stay here any longer.
This last category has to do with the loss of professional and personal identity. It's quite clear in this interview that the person can't see the difference between an NGO and a business, and a for-profit business. And this is very complicated when it comes to working in the third sector. This is what she said: it doesn't matter to me if it's an NGO, an enterprise, or the government. If you'd ask me, how do you see it in a minute, I would say, to me it's the same thing, because there's a budget, money comes in, and you execute it. There are many things for which you can use the budget. Out comes a project, and you write the reports.
What we found is that workers assimilate managerialist discourse. Labor relations are under precarization due to the installation of a cost-benefit rationality. People are seen as assets. Defense and adhesion strategies have a toll on people's health and generate subjective suffering. And the third sector organizations are growing apart from their historical role and the very social representations that they nurtured for decades. The idea that they had to deal, and they were born to deal with democracy and the rights, people's rights. There is plenty of room for new research projects here. There's plenty of room. We thought of 3. First of all was to in this same phenomenon, to try to look at the perspective of the financial partners, to see what they have to say about this. It would be important and interesting. A longitudinal study of one particular case out of those that we have chosen, and the idealization and organization commitment. Right? So how do you understand idealization in order to work with organizational commitment in these organizations? And finally, I saw this renovation today. It really impressed me. I wouldn't expect that I'd come out of the subway and see Leal tore down. And that is that head, that big head sculpture that they have over there close to the Saint Eustache church. And you can't see very well here, but it's surrounded. It's like in a cage. And many people feel like this today in organizations, especially in the third sector. They feel like they're inside a cage and they can think and they can say the things that they want to say. They can't express themselves. Like Michel Foucault, a competence machine. They want the person, but not the person's political views. So I think that we as researchers need to help organizations challenge what their current idea of normality is. That would be a way of helping the world define sustainability. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup pour votre attention.